Everybody, I'm so glad you could be here today. I'm Barb Atwell. I'm part of the Oral History Project team along with Donna Eista. It's April 2nd, 2022, and this project is sponsored by the Outreach and Nurture Committee of the Berkeley Friends meeting. I'm so excited to introduce Dorothy. One of my favorite things about this project is getting to know people and hearing their stories ahead of time, right? And so a couple weeks ago, Dorothy and I sat in her beautiful backyard in Richmond and talked about her life. So she has stories about translating French poetry and all kinds of great stuff. So Dorothy, welcome, and let's hit the road.
First, I want to thank everybody who has been part of this event. Donna and Barb have been just wonderfully supportive and informative and helpful. And I am, as have you, Judy. And also I talked to my dear friend, Gail Lederer, whose oral history I also watched. I have a tape of it myself. And I also am very grateful to all of you who have given up a beautiful sunny Saturday and are watching this instead. I was born in Albany, New York in 1936. I was a New Year's baby, as people still remind me or comment on when they see my driver's license for some reason. And we didn't live in Albany. We were a farm family. My parents and my considerably older brother and sister. My sister's 7 years older, my brother 9 years older. And that alas changed not long after I was born, because my father, who passionately loved farming and animals and nurture and so forth, he had a congenital heart condition, and he died very suddenly when I was 18 months old and he was 35. And I've often asked myself whether I would have rather been my older brother and sister, who knew and adored their dad, and who had, of course, a very deep psychic wound, you can imagine, as children. And when he died so suddenly, he's lost to me, except for photographs and for stories. I don't remember him at all. People always assure me, oh no, you wouldn't at 18 months. But we kept the farm until I was 4. My mother hung on to it. It was very rural in those days. Our neighbors, farmer neighbors, were mainly Dutch, and they were old Dutch families that had been there since colonial days, maybe since the 17th century. They had names like Hoes. And anyway, my family think of the farm as a kind of lost paradise. And my mother eventually decided that what she needed to do was go back to school and get a degree so she could teach. And then she could earn our living and then still provide a home and a maternal presence for 3 little children, 3 children. That was what happened. For a while, we lived in Ithaca, and my mother got a master's at Cornell. She and my father had been in the agricultural school at Cornell and met there. But anyway, she got this degree and started teaching. And we settled in Delmar, which is a suburb of Albany. Delmar was very Republican and very white and Gentile. And I still remember about that. One thing I remember vividly first is being a child during World War II and about the blackouts and the special blinds that were used for blackouts, not being able to have things like butter. But I also remember VE Day, victory in Europe, and the war, that part of the war at least, being over. And I remember that someone gave me a balloon and I blew up this balloon. And then my mother and I got on a very crowded bus And I was sure that it was so crowded that somebody would pop the balloon. And I got on the bus and I was holding the balloon like this. And all these people, they kept saying, "Don't worry, we won't hurt your balloon. I won't hurt your balloon." And I think I sensed, without knowing how to put it into words at that age, that in a sense I was speaking for these people. And they were looking at me and they thought, here's a child with a balloon. Life is normal and decent and lovely again. So, also, but I remember not only World War II and its ending, but I remember FDR, who was a sort of household god in our house. And as I say, Delmar was very Republican. It seemed to me all the men worked for the telephone company. And when I went to school, I would hear the kids say, Thomas E. Dewey was running against Roosevelt at the time. Thomas E. Dewey famously described in the New Yorker as the little man on the wedding cake, dapper with his mustache. Anyway, the kids would say, Dewey's in the White House, ready to be elected. Roosevelt's in the garbage pail, ready to be collected. Well, Dewey lost. I didn't argue with these kids. I pretty much kept my mouth shut. I'm not a very argumentative person, and I didn't see what purpose it would serve if I did fight with these kids about that stuff. And so I just enjoyed it when Dewey and they lost. Well, I got older and the family sent me to Westtown Friends School, which I think a number of you certainly know about or perhaps know. It's a beautiful school. If you've ever seen it, it is such a beautiful school, beautiful lawns, beautiful grounds, spots of woods here and there, and a lake where we got to skate, where we got to canoe. And there were all kinds of special opportunities at Westtown. Once a year, the students were in a Shakespeare play, and there was also a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta. I was in those. I never got a principal lead part, much as I longed to do it. I think I was still very timid and shy at that time. But anyway, I tried out and I was always part of it in a chorus or something. And I learned both the plays and the operettas, and also working with all those people and having a great time learning to work with people. That was wonderful. There was also a very fine chorus. And the teachers, many were just wonderful people. That came in so handy years later when I became a teacher myself. Two wonderful history teachers, Agnes Finney and Al Hay, wonderful biology teacher, Fred Swan, and numerous English teachers, Jack Weidman, Carol Brown, Dorothy Gould. The math teachers were good too, but I was so bad at math and so dumb at it that there wasn't much they could do with me. They tried, so they deserve credit. So that was a place of great opportunity. And one thing that was really valuable in my education was, of course, Friends meeting, which we were required to go to on Thursday and Sunday mornings. And I learned that it was very sustaining and very supportive. Faculty would often speak, and so would some of the students, some of the braver of the students. But I vividly remember times when there would be what may have been a yearly meeting. It was some kind of special occasion when other people would come to our little community. And some of these were very weighty friends who had been very much part of some other community. There was a well-known woman named Anna Fisher, and she was known as the singing friend. And she would wear a floor-length black dress, very severe, and a close-fitting black bonnet of a very old-fashioned kind. I don't know the material, bombazine, I don't know. Anyway, and she would chant. She would stand up in meeting and she would say, And these dear young people in the bloom of youth. Um, there was also a weighty friend named William Bacon Evans. I know that those names are famous. Um, and he would get up in meeting and he would talk about shipwreck and of all the sinful people who were on their knees praying and crying for mercy. And he would say, "Oh, ye evolutionists, oh, ye mockers of God, and ye scorners of religion, where is your mockery now?" And we kids, we were so bad. We couldn't control our laughter. We just thought these people were so weird and so funny. And I usually was wearing a jacket when I went to meeting. And when these people spoke, I would hide my head, I would hide my face in my chest and hide the rest of my head in the jacket and hope that nobody saw my shaking shoulders, which of course they did see. But anyway, we did our best with that. And I remember Anna Fisher used to compliment at the end of the meeting, she would compliment the students on being so well behaved and courteous. And we would feel like criminals. We would feel just terrible. And anyway, that was Westtown. Another thing about Westtown detail that I loved, every October there was a kind of chore day when school was excused and we students helped out with the maintenance of the buildings and grounds. And a very special thing to do, if you were lucky, was we made apple butter to last through the winter. And there would be this huge cauldron over a fire out of doors. And in the crisp October air, you would smell this wonderful spicy apple smell. And you would see these people standing around the cauldron, stirring it. And I would always think of Macbeth and the witches. And I would think, cool it with a baboon's blood, then the spell is firm and good. Well, it didn't taste like baboon's blood as far as I know. It was very good. And that was a lovely detail that I remember. I should say something about my mother and all she was able to give to us while she led this strenuous life as breadwinner and homemaker. And some, I'm sure, of what she gave us was my father too, because they had much in common. But a love of nature, a love of the out of doors, and very, very, very much a love of animals. I've always adored animals, as did my brother and sister and my mother. And also plants, gardening. This is what I have just helped to grow, to produce in my front lawn. I did want you to see it, and there are many more. So growing things has always been a great satisfaction to me and to my whole family. And but also there was a great love of literature. My mother loved books. She taught us very early on to love books. She read to us long before we could read and wrote down poems of mine before I could write them down. And there were always poems, usually light poems and funny poems, that she would introduce to us and that we grew up with. And there's one I'd like to share because we just thought it was so much fun. And we all loved it and enjoyed each other with it so much. It's called The Sycophantic Fox and the Gullible Raven. And it's by Guy Wetmore Carl, who flourished in the 20s. And it goes like this. A raven sat upon a tree, and not a word he spoke, for his beak contained a piece of brie, or maybe it was roquefort. In any case, Uh, we'll make it any kind you please. In any case, it was a cheese. Beneath the bough's umbrageous limb, a hungry fox sat smiling. He saw the raven watching him and spoke in words beguiling. Chat mere, he said, ton beau plumage, the which is simply persiflage. Two things there are, no doubt you know, to which a fox is used. A rooster that is bound to crow, a crow that's bound to roost. And whichsoever he espies, he tells the most unblushing lies. The fox said, Sir, I understand you're more than merely natty. I hear you sing to beat the band and Adelina Patti. Pray, render with your liquid tongue a bit from Götterdammerung. This subtle speech was meant to please the crow, and it succeeded. He thought no bird in all the trees could sing as well as he did. In flattery completely doused, he gave the jewel song from Faust. But gravitation's law, of course, as Isaac Newton showed it, exerted on the cheese its force, and elsewhere soon bestowed it. Indeed, there is no need to tell what happened when to earth it fell. I blush to add that when the bird took in the situation, he said one brief, emphatic word unfit for publication. The fox was very startled, but he only smiled and answered, Top. The moral is, a fox is bound to be a shameless sinner. And also when the cheese comes round, you know it's after dinner. But what is only known to few, the fox is after dinner too. I think a lot of people and animals know that. Well, from Westtown, I went to Cornell, and I majored in history. I was in the art school, and I'd always loved history. But people thought mainly that I was an English or literature major because I think I loved that even more. And I talked about it a lot, and I talked about it with people who were English majors. And I was a writer, or trying to be even then. And so, one of the things that I remember, even more than some of my excellent history courses and philosophy courses and so on, what I remember is Vladimir Nabokov's Russian literature and translation course, which was quite famous. He also taught Masters of European Fiction, and I once went to hear him lecture on James Joyce, and of course it was splendid. But it was the Russian course that I really experienced. And it was a big course, and his wife, Vera Nabokov, she of the spotless, beautiful, beautiful white hair and the very imperious manner, she would sit there and take attendance. And the thing we got from Nabokov, what I got, and it's lasted all my life, he got such a sense of the felt life in literature, that how things smell, how they sound, and how they look, just the feeling of life. And when he was teaching Chekhov and Anna Karenina, he made you feel that so much. And I remember when he was beginning Anna Karenina, there's a description of the Russian newspaper that Karenina, the husband, reads. And Nabokov would talk about that, about how that newspaper smelled. And something he was quite famous for, because he published his lecture notes to that course and the other course to a very laudatory critical audience. But among those notes, he would write on the board a diagram of how Anna Karenina met her lover, Count Vronsky. And it was this diagram of the train, and really it was a matter of chance that they met, as I remember. And so it was very important how the train was set up and the corridors and so forth that they happened to meet. Anyway, this vivid sense of life. And I know literature is about other things too. It's about ideas and plots and characters and so forth. But that feeling of that sensory feeling that you are in it, I always thought was so important, and we got so much of that from him. Nabokov did me a very great kindness that had a big effect on my life. When I graduated from Cornell, I was looking for a job, and I thought I would go into publishing. And I asked him, I wrote to him and said, I'm going to try to get a job at the New Yorker. Could I use your name? And very soon after that, oh, I should tell you, just by the way, I happened to win a prize. The Morrison Poetry Prize was the university-wide prize in poetry that was offered every year. You got $100 and a lot of fame and glory, at least among people who cared about poetry. And I got that prize my senior year. And Nabokov was one of the judges, and he was just thrilled with my poetry. He loved it, and he asked me to send him personal copies of it. He was like that. And there were two other professors, English professors, Bill McConkie and Arthur Meisner. But it was Nabokov who particularly I connected with. He did have that great love of supporting writer students, and he did it with other people as well. And anyway, soon after I wrote him, I got this letter from Vera, and it was saying, my husband wants you to know that he has written to Mrs. E.B. White, his editor. That was Catherine White, who hired E.B. White and then married him. She was a very famous and very formative influence on the New Yorker. Anyway, he has warmly recommended you for the job. He hopes you get the position, and he hopes you are not neglecting your own writing. So I had actually gotten a job by that time, and it was a good job. I was working for the New York branch of Oxford University Press, and had already settled in New York City, which was what I really, really wanted to do, and having a marvelous time. But what I did was get a job interview at the New Yorker, and they said, well, be patient and hang out at Oxford, but if you're interested in us, we'll make you an offer and then see. So that's what happened. I stayed at Oxford for a year and learned a great deal from them. And I also, they would have damaged book sales. And I once got a Greek lexicon that was supposed to cost $33. Now it would cost, I don't know, 200 or something terrible. But I got it for $3. And then anyway, I was eventually offered a job by the same senior editor who had interviewed her. He interviewed me. His secretary got married, and he offered me the job as an assistant and his secretary. And I took that, and the understanding was that if something in the writing or editorial field, an advancement came up, I was to feel free to try out for that. And so he said, I think the New Yorker will be a wonderful place for you to find yourself, for people to find themselves. So I stayed there. I stayed there 8 years in all. I have a couple of vivid memories that I like to share with you that I think you'd enjoy. One, when Kennedy, JFK, was shot, we were, of course, there working. And a great big television set was brought in to my office, which was a big office where a lot of people could gather. And that happened whenever there was something big happening. And I remember how all of us, the support staff and the writers and the editors, anybody there, we were all gathered together in this room, watching Kennedy's life ebb away, watching our hope Edward Hay. And it was such a, there we all were thinking, how can we get our minds around this? How can we accept that it's happening? How can we bear it? And thank God we were all there together. I don't know what it would have been like if I'd been at home. And I think many people felt the same way. Well, I went home. The next morning, I did something I often did, either for pure pleasure or because I was upset or sad and needed support, because it would always provide joy. I lived in Brooklyn Heights, right across the East River from downtown Manhattan. And it was where East River empties into the New York Harbor. And 3 short blocks down from me was the harbor, and something called the Esplanade, which was a big paved walkway with benches and so on, kind of a little park. And you could go there and walk up and down, and you would be directly across from downtown Manhattan. It was a wonderful view, of course, of the harbor, and also of the miles and miles of freighters. The Esplanade was built up over the harbor, and so you could look at miles of freighters drawn up at their docks. And then I wrote this poem about it, which was published in the New Yorker. And the poem goes like this: At the Brooklyn docks, November 23, 1963. I'm getting a little croaky. In the morning air, the freighter Havsgård from Oslo lies drawn up at her Brooklyn pier. The light breaks on her masts and ropes and shows their tents, endless tents and triangles that crowd in the white air and rise and ride each other. A man waves and a boom descends. A shout and a crate is hoisted up from dock to decks. It swings and lands, and the men on board take it away. Near me, above the ships, the workmen spread tar on the roofs, black in the early sun. The smell of seawater and tar is thick. It stings in the nostrils, and like coffee, wakes me. Wakes me to what I see and what I know. Where the light strikes, there is the thrust of sadness up the white spars and ropes, the shapes of day, along the decks and on the Havsgård's flag at half-mast, like her neighbors and my own. Is work as old as grief? Watching, I feel the slow and wounded groping of my senses toward my old life. Here in my neighborhood, under the flags lost among ropes, the men cry out, great swing in the silence after. Under the watchful eyes, the burden lands. All down the shore, the day changes and moves. Well, that was a time, I have to say, from the way people related to me, looked at me and so forth, it was the second time in my life, at least, when I felt that I had truly spoken for other people. Maybe as a little kid for having a balloon, and this time for speaking out as I did. And I sensed their gratitude. And it was a very special, with all the grief that I felt and the shock and the horror that such a thing could even happen. There was that feeling that I spoke for people and could do that. And also, I'll never forget that I got this wonderful letter from the PR man at the Port of New York Authority. And I treasured that letter so much. He told me that I should write to Jacqueline Kennedy, and so that the poem would be sure to be in the Kennedy Library. I did write to Mrs. Kennedy. I don't know whether the poem is in the library or not. I hope so, because it was in the New Yorker and it would be noticed, but I don't know. Anyway, it was an amazing experience. There was another experience, though, at the New Yorker. It was with a historic event. And that was in 1965. There was a huge blackout that covered the northeastern United States and part of Canada. And I was sitting in my office at 5:25 in the afternoon. We worked from 10 in the morning until 6 at night, very civilized. But at 5:25, the overhead light in my office began making a nasty noise. And then it went out. And I noticed that we all noticed, all the lights went out. And then it began to appear that lights were going out all over the city. So somebody turned on a transistor radio, and that made it worse, because the radio said, "We hear that the lights are going out in Albany." And then, "We hear that the lights are going out in Quebec." And we began to think that the lights were going out all over the world. And my friend Emily Pond said, "We're going to be bombed." Thank you, Emily. You could have kept that to yourself, since we were all thinking something horrible was going to happen. Well, it got dark. And I remember I went across the hall and I went and stood in an empty editor's office and looked out at northern Manhattan. Miles and miles of skyscrapers and tall buildings, all of them completely dark. And of course, I knew that there were all these people stuck in there. The elevators didn't work. We were all stuck in the buildings. And I thought there must be thousands of people sitting there like that. And it was such a strange sight, this great city, all dark. And then a great big fat full moon came up over it. And just as I was looking at this, I heard a very gentle, almost boyish voice say to me, "Are you all right?" And I looked, and it was William Shawn, the editor-in-chief of the New Yorker for many years. And he was famous for having that voice. And excuse me. And I said I was. And we talked about all those people who were like trapped like us. And then he said, "I have ordered some limousines to take people home. Now, I know you live in Brooklyn, and if there's any difficulty with getting you home, you can sleep on the couch in my office, and I will sleep on the floor." And this was absolutely dumbfounding, because his office was the holy of holies. No one went in there unless they had some very compelling reason. They were probably very, very famous. And so I think I told him that I was a camper and used to sleeping on ground and so forth. And that was only partly true, or a little bit true. But anyway, it didn't happen. What happened was that we walked down 19 flights of fire escape. I, with my severe acrophobia, I've always been terrified of heights, but needs must. And so we walked down, and then I took one of the limousines to Midtown Manhattan and spent the night with my friend Emily. And so that was how we got through that one. I left the New Yorker after 8 years with some reluctance, but I decided that I wanted to teach in a college or a university, and I wanted to get a degree. So I did. I went to the University of California at Davis, which was a totally different world, totally different climate, but exciting in its way. Not long after I'd committed myself to this, I realized, or it became evident, that this was a simply terrible time for anybody who wanted to get a job in academia. But people encouraged me. They said, "You're very good, and you would be good, and you should persevere." So I did persevere. And I decided to be a medievalist, partly because I did love the period, but also I thought there wouldn't be as many medievalists. Not everybody is willing to put themselves through all the things you have to know. And so I did that. And I eventually completed my coursework, and I wrote a huge doctoral dissertation on Geoffrey Chaucer and his poetic practice, which was a great deal of fun, of course. Chaucer is always so much fun. And Chaucer is great fun to teach, too. So I'm very glad I did that. But I should tell you about an adventure I had while I was in graduate school, a mental adventure. I was preparing to take my doctoral exams, and I was terrified. And a thing I did to keep myself sane was something very crazy. I wrote a piece of science fiction. I discovered a planet, and a planet we on Earth and I call Museus, which is a mythic name. Some of you, if you know your mythology, know that there is a godlet singer figure called Museus, who is something like Orpheus, and is sometimes associated with Orpheus, a poet, singer, musician. And so this was the singer planet. And I located it in a real place. I kid you not, this is April 2nd, not April 1st. Museus is, or the Museus of my mind, is in the solar system of Tau Ceti, a real star. It's the second nearest star to us. And now I was doing this in the 1970s, but I discovered that since 2012, astronomers think that there are planets, Earth-sized planets, 4 of them, going around Tau Ceti, and maybe one of them is Museus. So I hope so. And Museus is full of these poems and songs, and some of them are parodies of medieval literature. Like in medieval literature, find flightings, which are insult contests. Lots of cultures have insult contests. The blacks have doing the dozens, and the Eskimos have something, and then the medieval people had these very abusive flightings. But my favorite genre there were several, was the cook song. And in a way, it was a parody of Beowulf or something like that, because they were heroic boasts, but not by warriors. They were quite domestic. They were by chefs. And I don't know what gender they were, but they were these master chefs. And they would boast. And I want to share with you one of these poems. I published a good many of these poems eventually. The immediate purpose was to get me through my orals, which happened, or my doctoral exam. But I want to read to you a cook song that is in, this is Eating Words, the Norton Anthology of food writing. And there are all sorts of, Bria Savarin is in it, and Alice B. Toklas is in it, and A.J. Liebling of the New Yorker is in it, and I am in it. And it's edited, by the way, if you want to know, by Sandra M. Gilbert, no relation, but dear friend, and Roger J. Porter. And this is the poem, or the kind of sub-poem. Excuse me, my lamp is misbehaving. I really think I need to fix it so I can see. Okay. Thanks for waiting. 2 cook songs from the planet Museus on the same subject by rival poets. Ho! I am going to make some whips. They will transport you. In a pot, I'll put Pitakaskadibia, slibs, liddicots, lopples, lorops, hibbles, and the pips of coffatids. Latiperns are good too, and chittibubs and phylloxes if you like those. I use coryphus, though coarse spirits don't like them. Biberits, ricets, kikadifilets, gillibits, timobiberits, and other tidbits. Bilps, bitter pips, and stemmerets, and pripples, pits, pulp, and skin. Stewed for long hours, they lie finally seething in a hot, sweet paste. Whips, wonderful whips. Not one in this world makes whips like mine. Ho! I have done it. Now here's the second poet, the rival. Ho! I am going to make small whips to excite you. Chittibubs, lopsided and brown, sleepy features in corners I'll use, and phylloxes like heavy flowers, hibbles like pale creatures caught in cold seas. Landed, they smell strangely of sweet roots, dug from the loom, stored long in sunlight. Doves also make a sweet, sleepy taste. Latiperns, long dried and hung in branches, lorops and coryphits, all the little fruit called pitacascadiblia. Then biberits and ricets, bitterpips and stemmerets, pripples and bilps, pippakipperets and fips, warm wines, green teas, spices for your delight. All sizzle in my whips, the best you'll ever have. Ho! I have done it. So I'd like to quickly share just one other poem from Musaeus. This is the one that convinces me, not for logical reasons, I think really just for emotional reasons, that these things are being sent to us. I think, while I was working on this stuff, I realized finally that it was a kind of metaphor, that I have never lost my wonder. And I often encounter it in students too, when you're teaching something like Chaucer or God knows Gilgamesh or the Odyssey, these things that can be so vivid and so human and connect so beautifully with you. They may come across thousands of years or hundreds of years or last week. But there is such wonder in that they can travel so far across time. Well, the poems of Musaeus, whether they're about cooking or about something else, they come across vast fields of space and time too, because Tau Ceti is 11.9 light years away from us. Really, that's a fact. And that's a long way, that's lots of space. So, but whether they're just spewed out into the universe generally, or whether they're sent to us on purpose, this is the poem. And it just goes like this. Listen, listen. The lights burn blue and red over the doors in the country you have never seen. Listen, a country I can only describe and fail to describe. You will never see it. If only you could see it. Listen, it is unbelievably beautiful. When it is dark, the doors are sprinkled with simul dust to make them fragrant. The dark itself appears to, listen, be full of simul dust. It is very wonderful. The air is full of things to smell and hear. If only you could hear. Listen. Well, so much for extraterrestrial poetry, at least for now. Then what else did I do? Excuse me, I have to look a bit at my notes. Oh, I should tell you that I did take my exams for the doctorate, and I took them in 115-degree weather in Davis in the Sacramento Valley. And that meant that the entire air conditioning system in the university broke, and everybody in the university except me, almost, was sent home to their own air conditioning. Not me. I sat there writing this thing. And also, by the way, I learned later, the air conditioning in the government offices, the state of California in Sacramento, broke down. And so the government of the state of California went home to their own air conditioning. But I sat there writing my exam for the doctorate and wondering why I felt so peculiar, and just assuming that, of course, I was nuts, and which I probably was anyway. But anyway, that's what happened. But I passed, and then I wrote my dissertation, and then I got out into the ferociously cruel world where nobody wanted to hire me. But nonetheless, I persisted, as they say. And in a way, there was something good about that, because while it was painful, I got to experience a number of kinds of collegiate institutions. I got to teach at Merritt College in Oakland, which a community college, of course, and I got to know many people who were Black, who were poor, who were re-entry, women coming back to learn nursing, men coming back to learn all kinds of skills. And but I also, as a contrast, got to teach at two very elegant liberal arts colleges, Deer Mills College in Oakland, a women's college, of course, and then a co-ed college, very elegant, the Colorado College in Colorado Springs. And finally, I got myself a job at Cal State East Bay, which was then called Cal State Hayward. I think a number of us think Cal State East Bay is a silly name. Why not call it Cal State eBay or Cal State Western Hemisphere or something? But anyway, so I taught there, and they really, I was so lucky. They really thought of me as a can-do girl, and they gave me all sorts of wonderful courses to teach. I was a generalist. You know, I wasn't the medievalist. I was, but I was given all these things to do, and I taught Chaucer many times, and I taught it at the graduate level as well as the undergraduate. I was twice given the Shakespeare course, and I was twice given the Milton course, and people told me that these things came alive. I must say I greatly enjoyed them. And I also got to teach the mythology course over and over. So I had a great time. And I also got to teach a poetry course that I taught at UC Davis. And I made the kids work with very strict forms, and they would yell and scream and complain. I can't write a sestina. What do you mean? But then they would write a sestina, which is a very difficult thing to do. And they would do beautiful work. So these things are possible. I stayed at Cal State Hayward 12 years. And then it seemed as though the humanities courses or the literature courses were drying up, and that a lot of the money was going to business and computers and remedial, none of which were really my cup of tea. And so I was of an age to retire, and I did. That was in 2004. And then in 2005, a dear friend and colleague of mine put me onto a possibility in the fall program for freshmen at Cal. And I got in. And this was a wonderful institution. I understand that it's fallen on hard times now. I've since retired, but I taught there 10 years, and it was just wonderful. We worked very hard because we gave the kids a great deal of writing and rewriting and rewriting, and they learned to write, if I do say so. They really learned to write, but also you picked your own courses, you picked your own syllabus. It was up to me, subject to approval, of course, the theme I would teach and the syllabus I would make. I started out by having a course about the quest. Then I had the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Odyssey and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, beautiful Arthurian medieval story. Um, but then I hit on something else. I decided to teach a course about animals in literature and what animals have meant, other animals have meant to human animals throughout history and culture. And so I did that. And there was so much material. And it really was a delight. And the students loved it. The kind of students I got for a course like that were mainly integrative biology students, but also psychology and philosophy, not so much English majors, language majors, and so forth. Um, but I was often amazed and delighted how wise, not just smart, but wise, these Berkeley students were at evaluating literature, given half a chance. So that was really, and we had, I posed all sorts of questions to them at the beginning and the end about what is our relationship to the other animals, to what Robert Burns and John Muir have called our fellow mortals, which is how I've always thought of them, with a certain, I don't know, poignancy. They are our fellow mortals. And what is our relationship? What can be our relationships to them? Why is it and how is it that we have often made animals as metaphors for our own existence in political situations, in many kinds of situations? And in a world where it's fast being discovered that our genetic material is not very different from theirs, I think 90-something% of our genetic material is not that different from that of a mouse. And then we discovered that animals, they think logically, they figure things out. Some of them use tools. And if you watch nature programs on television, you know about this. There are tests that pros do. There's a wonderful book. It was reviewed very favorable in places like the New York Review of Books by a Dutch scholar named Delmar, and it's called "Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are?" He's a primatologist, but he's interested in all animals, and he's told us some stories in his book about octopuses. And octopuses, you can put an octopus inside a jar and screw the lid, and the octopus sitting inside there will figure out how to unscrew it. And also, they remember faces. If your job is to feed an octopus and you give it bad food, it will remember who you are. It will remember your face and throw food back at you. That may not seem too remarkable, but I found it interesting, and so did the kids. Anyway, and so I asked these questions, and also, why in today's world, why do people care so much about animals? Why are they so interesting to us? We don't depend on them the way people used to depend on horses, for instance, or guard dogs or whatever. But animals fascinate many people. And also, we are the species that keeps pets. Why? Why is that so important? And there's one of the things that I used. I didn't just use ancient literature. I used well, of course, Kafka's Metamorphosis, as well as Ovid's Metamorphoses, but also the wonderful Hispanic writer, a very old Gabriel Marquez. Has a wonderful story called A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. Well, this is a peculiar creature who shows up at a village, and people can't decide whether he's an animal or a scraggly old man or an angel, and word somehow gets out that he's probably an angel. And then that upsets everybody. It upsets the church, it upsets the doctors, and so on and so forth. Very, very funny, very magic realism, lovely, lovely story. But I also, one thing that I use is a charming article in the New Yorker a few years ago by Adam Gopnik called Dog Story. And in it, he begins the story by saying how much he and his wife don't like dogs and don't want one in their New York apartment. But their 14-year-old daughter longs for a dog and they feel she should have one. So they get one. And while Gopnik is being a good journalist and he is exploring the whole history of humans and dogs together, he falls more and more in love with this dog. And he ends the story saying, why wouldn't someone have a dog? I can't imagine not having one. But he's very philosophical, and he asks, in fact, he even takes on Ludwig Wittgenstein, who said, if a lion could talk, we could not understand him. And I used to ask the students about that. Personally, I think Wittgenstein is wrong. He's the great man, and I'm not anybody. But it just seems to me that lion experience and dog experience and cat experience, whatever, is not that different from ours. And that if a lion could talk, he'd have some very interesting things to say that we'd understand very well. I'm going to indulge myself a little and say, I knew Tom Nagel in college. In fact, I sat next to him in a Greek class. He was a friend, he and his first wife, Doris. And I told him about my science fiction, and he said, but you can't write that. You can't say that, because if a lion, because you know what Wittgenstein says, and we can't communicate with the animals. If we couldn't understand a lion, even if it could talk. And then, of course, or may know that Nagel went on and wrote a very famous philosophical essay called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" The point is not what you or I would be like as a bat, or how we would feel, how a bat feels. And the message is we're not to know. Tom's feeling was that I couldn't possibly, even giving science fiction, I couldn't really, we'll never know what people from other planets think and say, because their minds and their existence and their consciousness are too different. And every so often I would have a class where I would try this on them. I would say that I'm writing this thing. Anyway, sometimes I would have students write on that Nagel essay for extra credit. Anyway, that course was just wonderful fun. And it's just too bad that when I got into my 80s, when I got to be 81 or 82, I just found that I was diminished enough so that I didn't think I had the strength to wheel myself all over steep Berkeley campus and do all that very hard work. And rather than try and not succeed, I retired, and I still miss it. I still miss those kids. They were just wonderful. But then I retired, and I'll just mention before we break, I think it's a good time to break, but I'll just mention that there were two other things that I've been doing all along. Once for years, I was the coordinator or office manager of the West Coast branch of PEN. And PEN being the writers' advocacy organization that defends writers, and oppressed writers in countries where they're in political danger and so forth. And it does many other services. And I got to know many wonderful writers in in this area. And that's a whole event in itself. I could talk about that for a long time. But I decided to focus on teaching and on poetry for this event. The other thing, though, that I did for years, beginning in graduate school, was I decided to translate old French romances into rhymed octosyllabic verse. When I discovered these poems, these long romances, and I found how wonderful they were in French, it seemed to me that the English translations available to most people were they were a couple of generations old, and they were mainly in prose or in not very good poetry, and they were rather spiritless. And they might be accurate enough, but they were just ponies, and I don't mean disrespect, but they needed refurbishing. And so I set out, and I was lucky to get an NEH grant. Actually, I took 1 year off, and I translated the first known Arthurian romance, and Eric and Enid by Chrétien de Troyes. And then later on, I translated. I got a contract with W.W. Norton, and I did the Norton critical edition of the poet Marie de France, who was like Chrétien, probably flourished. He flourished, I guess, around 1170 at the court of Eller of Aquitaine's daughter, Marie de Champagne. As far as Marie is concerned, she's a mysterious lady, and I'll discuss what I did with these people after the break. But that was what I was doing, and after the break, I will tell you a little about what I did with them. And then, after I retired, I began working more on my own poetry. And when the pandemic hit, I kept myself sane by putting together my collection of original verse, which came out in August of 2020. So
so much. I'm so excited to hear more. I don't really want to take a break, but I feel like we need to take about a 5-minute break. And
okay, so far.
yeah, great. And I just wanted to get back. I didn't want to rush you, but I felt like we kind of rushed through the whole translation thing. So can you start with telling me when you started doing that wonderful French poetry translation?
Oh, well, when in the 1970s, and it was after I got my doctorate in 1975, and I'm trying to remember. It was so long ago, and it was the early 80s. I got my NEH grant in 1984, that whole year of 1984-85. And I'd done, I guess, maybe 400 lines by then. And then I completed it. It was published in 1992. And I'm trying to remember now just when I started it. But I remember reading old Wister Comfort's prose translations, which I don't mean to be catty. He did everybody service translating these things, but they seem very wooden and spiritless to someone of our generation. And also, I just think it's a shame that these things have to be in kind of plodding prose, even if they're accurate. You know, and then people think medieval literature is dull. But anyway, he did. What he contributed was valuable, but it was dated by my time. So that's when I started on that. And then, so that was published in 1992, and I actually got an award from a translation center at Columbia University. But it wasn't, then a friend of mine kept pushing me to translate Marie de France, my feminist scholar friend, Sandra M. Gilbert, no relation, but intimate friend for many years, from Cornell. And anyway, so I did start on that. And years and years and years that I spent on these things. I think each of those books took me 12 years. Maybe a little less with Marie. Marie was easier for one thing. She wrote short stories and little poems, many of them. It was a lot of stuff, but it was somehow easier than one great big long Arthurian romance. The Chrétien romance is 6,878 lines long. I did them all, and I did them all in rhyme first, but it took a while. Everybody said I couldn't do it, but I did it. So do you have any more questions or things you'd like to say now, or shall I go ahead and read or talk?
Please continue.
What would people, Barb?
Please continue.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, Eric and Enid, this is a very, very pretty book. Can you see? I got permission to use an actual manuscript that I got from the Bibliothèque Nationale. I did go to the Bibliothèque Nationale and look at original manuscripts. Not that I needed to, but it just meant a great deal to me to actually see these things. The Eric and Enid is from around 1170, first known Arthurian romance. It's a lovely story. What happens is that Eric is a young knight at the top of his profession. He's not yet 25 years old, but he has never had a lady love, a girlfriend, an amie. He has avoided the pains and uncertainties and complications and general mess of being in love. But then he meets a girl and falls in love with her. Her name is Enid. And he takes her back to Arthur's court, where she's enthusiastically received, and he marries her. But then things go wrong. I should have said at the beginning that this is a story about how a young Arthurian knight manages both marriage and a career, and he makes a mess of it, because after he marries, and very happily too, he can think of nothing else but his wife, and he spends all his time. They stay in bed until noon, and he neglects arms and exploits and so forth. And the other knights are very, very sad at the way he's been unmanned, very angry, and they blame her. And Eric is oblivious to all this, but she, Enid, who, by the way, is probably a very young girl. She's 18 at most, between 15 and 18. I say that because that's when a young girl would have gotten married, if not earlier. Anyway, so he is oblivious. She is very aware. And one morning, after they've made passionate love, he has fallen back asleep, or sort of asleep, and she is lying in bed weeping because she thinks that she's ruined him. And but he wakes up and he makes her tell him. And then he is deeply humiliated and shamed, and he makes her get up and get out of bed and put on the most beautiful clothes she has. And they go on a quest, she riding in front of him in her beauty and her very wealthy clothes as a lure. And she is not supposed to warn him if anything, any threats come about, which they do. And there is danger after danger after danger after danger. And each time she tries to warn him, he chews her out. But he overcomes all these dangers. And in the end, well, somewhat before the end, really, this is, I'll tell you, he becomes able to respect himself and able to accept himself, respect himself, and love her again. But it's really a novel of development, a Bildungsroman. You see both these young people grow up and become fit to be rulers of their little domain and so forth. But I would like to quickly read you just a little bit of the scene where she is weeping and he makes her tell him what is wrong. Friend, he said, sweetheart, say to me, why do you weep in this dreadful way? What has injured you so? Please say. I will know. I want to know. I must. Sweet friend, don't hide it. Speak and trust. What is it that's done wretchedly? I know those words referred to me, not someone else. I have no doubt. Tell me, what is this all about? I heard you speak. You have to say. She felt great fear then and dismay, desperation. She felt them glow. Fair sire, she said, I do not know what this is that you say to me. Lady, just why this secrecy? Don't hide from me. What can you gain? You have been crying, that is plain. This is not something trivial. Also, I heard you now, heard all you said. You must explain to me. Ah, fair sire, it was possibly a dream. It must have been indeed, if you heard anything. A need. What are these lies you observe to me? Plainly you're lying. Obviously, admit it now. Come now, confess, or you will add to your distress. Sire, she said, since you press me so, I will tell you what truth I know. I speak with sorrow and with dread. In this whole country, it is said by all, the fair, the dark, the red, what shame it is that since you've wed, you neglect arms and exploits. Oh, how your great worth has fallen low. It was long custom in the speech of knights together, each, to say none like you could be found, better or braver or more renowned in the whole world. Now they laugh, all, young folk and white-haired, short and tall. They call you passé, cowardly. Can you believe the pain for me to hear them laugh and jeer and mock? How much it hurts me when they talk. But what is most unbearable is that they blame me, fault me, all accuse me. This is, you see, their view. I have ensnared and captured you. They give this reason, every one. Your worth, your reputation's gone, and no man finds you venturesome. Now you must search your mind, find some way to obliterate this stain and have your honor back again. Much blame too often I have heard. I've never dared to speak a word, but wept with anxiety. Just now, it all swept over me. I could not help it. Thus, you see, I said it was done wretchedly. Lady, he said, you're right, I see, and they are right. Thus blame me. Get up, put on your clothes, prepare to ride, and get your richest wear. Get out of bed right now. Get dressed. Put on the very loveliest gown you own, and without delay, have the saddle brought straight away for your best palfrey. She obeyed. Now she was very much afraid. And off they go. My scarf here giving me trouble. I wanted to give you a little bit of Marie de France, and the time is marching on here, and I want to read you a little of what I wrote myself. Marie de France, very mysterious lady. We aren't sure who she was, and there are several candidates for her identity. A lot of scholars, including me, uh, sort of prefer the idea or possibility, likelihood even, that she was the illegitimate sister of Henry II of England, and became the powerful abbess of Shaftesbury. And there is a new novel, a bestseller, describing such a person. It's by Lauren Goff, and it's called Matrix. And it's a good book. I recommend it. Goff has a very nice prose style, and I think she is responsible in the way she speculates, extends in fiction what may have been. Anyway, Marie de France, what's intriguing about her, here again, it's this idea, here is this person who existed hundreds of years ago, and we know virtually nothing about her, but she has all this wonderful internal evidence. She was very learned, and she obviously read Latin. She could read Ovid and quotes and uses his stories. And she, she knew the church fathers, the philosophers, and so on. She could deal with all that. And so we think that she must have been in the church. But another thing, she was also very, very cognizant of court manners and ideas like courtly love, fine amours, and so forth. She also knew a lot about the folklore of her time, uses that. And she's aware of the abuses of her time. In her fables, she'll use Aesop fables and other things too. I'd love to talk about her fables, but some other time. But in the fable of the wolf and the lamb, the Latin writer, she translates from Phoebus, Phaedrus says well, a lot of officials do the sort of thing that the wolf did to the lamb. He says, that's more or less what he says. But she has a long list, and she says, this is the thing, this is what nobles do, and sheriffs and sergeants and all kinds of people like that. And they're wolves, and they treat us like lambs, or treat people like lambs. And she was probably noble herself. But I would like to do some with this. We're running out of time here, but one of my favorite of her lays, her short romances, is Enoch, which is about the knight who is a changeling, and he's a hawk. In this story, you have what in medieval times was a stock situation of the jeune fille mal mariée, unhappily married young girl. A very young girl would be married off to an old man, and for purposes of being a breeding machine, really. And there would be not necessarily any companionship between them. It was not necessarily a happy marriage, and in this case, it was a miserable one. This old guy has married this young girl, and terrified, as in all the stories, that he'll be cuckolded somehow, has kept her in virtual solitary confinement. All she ever sees is him and his unwelcome attentions, and his old widowed sister, who is her jailer. And one morning, she's, by the way, lost her beauty, seems to have lost her health. She hasn't produced any children. One day in spring being a time which makes you full of possibilities and longings, she's lying there thinking about that, weeping, and she curses her family who married her off, and she curses her husband. And she says, if only I could be like a lady in a romance and have an affair. And a little while after that, like a few minutes, she hears a noise at her window, and a beautiful hawk flies in. And then it turns into this immensely attractive, sexy knight. And she's terrified. But then I'll take it from there as much as I can. Just as she spoke, Lamenting so, she saw just by the small window a great bird's shadow stretched across. She had no notion what it was. It flew into the room. Bands bound each foot, a hawk, it seemed, around 5 or 6 moultings, maybe 5 years old. Now before the girl it perched upon the floor. When it had rested there a bit, and she had had a look, then it became a handsome, noble knight. The lady marveled at the sight. She trembled, shaken in her blood, in terror, covered up her head. Most courteous was the chevalier. It was he who first spoke to her. Oh, lady, do not fear me so. The hawk's a noble bird, although its secrets are obscure to you. Cherish, trust, what you know is true, and take me for your lover. Dame, it is for that, he said, I came. I have long loved you. I have long held in my heart desire so strong. No other woman has been my lover, and I shall never have another. But I could not come to you in love. Out of my palace could not move, had you yourself not summoned me. But now I can be your ami, your lover, your friend. The girl, encouraged by this talk, uncovered now her head and spoke, responding. She would be his love if he believed in God above. Now, that may seem like a strange response to a proposition, particularly a very attractive proposition. But in medieval times, she's just cursed her family. She's just cursed her husband. And she has made a very obvious wish that she could commit adultery. And so here comes this figure, and he could easily be the devil or a devil. And so she has to find out. So what he does is assure her. He says, you must understand, I am a deeply devout Christian, and I can prove it to you. But here's what we must do. You must pretend to be very, very sick, and you must demand that your jailer, this old woman, get you the priest and demand extreme unction. And then you'll hide under the covers. I will be lying beside you, but you must trust me. And I will take your form. And then they will come and give me the host, give me the last rites. And you will see that I'm able to take them, as I could not do if I were an evil spirit. So this is done. And thus the knight received the host, the wine, the blood of Jesus Christ. The priest left. They were as before, and the old woman closed the door. Lady and knight lay nestled there. Never was such a handsome pair. They laughed and played a while. They spoke of their new love in lovers' talk. The knight then took his leave to go back to his land. He said adieu. Softly she begged him to return, to make another visit soon. Lady, he said, at your request, I'll come before an hour has passed, but you must take great care and thought that we are not surprised and caught. The old dame will betray us, pry night and day with her spying eye. She will find out our love. For sure she will tell all to the Seigneur, to the Lord. If this should happen, as I say, and we're discovered in this way, I cannot leave, I cannot fly, without it happening that I die. After this speech, he went away, leaving his sweetheart in great joy. Next day she woke up hale and sound, all week of sweet contentment found. Care and attention gave her body, and she recovered all her beauty. Now she was glad of her small space. Why seek out joy in some other place? Often she wished to call her love and all their sweet communion have. Soon as her husband went away, early and late, and night and day, she had her pleasure with her knight. God grant these two a long delight. Now I'm going to read this last bit after this speech he went away. I'm going to read it in the French so you can see how beautiful Marie's French was. Les chevaliers attendent s'en va, à grand jouet, sa mille. El demain, il y avait tout de scène, notre fou hâtier la semaine. sans corsenet en grande fierté, tout à recouvre sa beauté. Or les places plus à sojourner, qu'un autre déduit à l'air. Son ami voit souvent faillir, et de lui son délit avère. Dès que ce cire s'en départ, et nuit, et jour, et tôt, et tard, elle a tout à son plaisir. Orlanduis Deus, lovus, jouir. Thank you. Now, do we have some time for me? Anyway, this is my book that I put together during the pandemic, but it is the work of many, many years. In fact, much of my life. And it's called Foxwoman Poems. It's published by Sugartown Publishing in Crockett, which is a small press, a cooperative press, not a vanity press, a cooperative press. So I did have to support some of this venture. I might read to you the title poem, Foxwoman. Here again, we have a changeling. I like changelings, people that are animals some of the time. And in Japanese folklore, the fox is, I'll read this to you quickly. The fox, or kitsune, is an important figure in Japanese folklore and culture, as in European culture, a trickster figure. Jordan remarks, this is a scholar of Japanese folklore, one of kitsune's favorite transformations is into a woman. This is often done for a trickster purpose, to make fun of a man, to frighten him, or even to seduce him. At other times, the motive is gratitude, as in the story of the fox woman leaving her child. So this poem is an ekphrastic poem. That is, it is a discussion of a visual work of art, a print by Yoshitoshi, 19th century Japanese artist. And it begins when the woman is leaving, but it tells most of the story. Foxwoman, Thoughts on Two Prints by Yoshitoshi and Hiroshige. She turns away. Her little boy, his hand on the brown train of her kimono, stares at her comfortable back, her swirling garment, his face all trust. No shadows there, no knowledge. Stay, he says, play. In that warm room of trunks and screens, rectangles, floral silks, with only a tumbling vine to hint at vagary in nature. How's he to know life's to be one goodbye after another? Here she has lived all these years in this house with this husband, a human being. He rescued her, a vixen. Her young fur sheen caught the eye of hunters in dead orange grasses. She led them, looped them, did her best to dizzy them, but they wore her down, closed in. Suddenly he rode up, scattered them all, scooped her to his saddle, shaking, weak with gratitude. She turned into a woman. That was the real ambush. Oh, he was stunned by her beauty, but not for long. A quick man with his instincts, he knew her gift. At home, he gave her silks, paintings, even a small dog and a koto, a stringed instrument. She learned to play brilliantly. The notes hung like fruit above their heads. He'd praise her, tell her stories of human history, wars, treacheries, honor beyond death. He'd guess her thought and praise it too, touching her shoulder. A pair of hunting spirits, they started thoughts from the mind's dim thickets, together sensing paths, traces. He stroked her hair, her stomach. She leaped. One animal, they spoke the speech. In that space, that den of themselves, they'd hollowed out of nothing. What were names, labels, captive and captive? Years passed. The sun grew, walked. What whiff woke her? Swamp spring, perhaps. newborns, damp fur, the salt of it, sweet earth, sweet grass, traces of sex, dusty or fresh, odors of the movement of blood, the pulse of fear in the doomed, fox barks in the swamps, the phosphorescence of her kind, the nights, the reeds, the crying. The part of her still in the room is woman, robe, obi, hair dressed in splendid loops. Past the threshold, her face is lost to us. Behind a screen, her profile's shadow lengthens, strangely proportioned. Fox nose, fox ears, fox leg and paw. She goes to Kitsune Bee, the glow in the night meadow. The foxes all communal, casting their fatal light, luring a man from his safe way on the road to town, drawing him into the marshes of longing and terror, and, of course, loss. Do I have a few minutes more?
Absolutely, please.
Yeah. Well, I think that then I will read my campfire poem. It's not very long. Here it is. Campfire, Paradise, Butte County, California, November 2018. If you breathe, whose dust are you breathing? Whose house, garden, artwork done 20 years? Photos, recipes, paintings, trophies, books. Surely they exist somewhere. They linger just above the ground beside a tombstone chimney. If you're faithful, you'll see them. Keep on, keep trying. 200 miles away, going to work in the smoke, you only wonder, who now with their keys to a vanished house and a charred wallet must make a house around them? Who was trapped in a car? Who lived to be 92, then exploded, oxygen tank and all? If you don't breathe, in your keyless house of air, are you there still with your books and your photos on the ash wall? Something more cheerful, some nature poetry, because I've always been such a nature girl. I'm going to get rid of this rebellious scarf. Time being. This poem is dedicated to a woman I used to stay with in Yosemite. She had a house in Foresta, which is a settlement that was swallowed up by the park around 1910, and is near Big Meadow, if you know Yosemite. And through it runs Crane Creek, which runs down from Crane Flat, if you know about that. And I used to go, when I visited this woman, Ann Abbott, I used to go swimming in Crane Creek. Ann Abbott died a few weeks ago of cancer. She was exactly my age. She was a dear, dear friend. And I often wrote poetry at her house. I think I may have started this one. I would go there, I would visit her, either just go up to visit her, or sometimes she would ask me to come up and look after her cats and her dog while she went on a trip or a hike or something. And so I would work there, looking out at the ponderosas and the incense cedars and writing. Crane Creek, Foresta. The cold grasps me. It is in me, moving with me. We are a double creature contending. We keep even if I keep moving. Face down, I swim in soft amber, over sand, mica, greenish stones, black rocks, under boulders, through colder shadows. Face up, I let the current carry me under the alders' green steps, levels, plains of light. The cold loves my hair, eats my face, makes sharp edges in my blood. Face down again, I fight the current, work my shoulders, win my way to the sun. On land, I am the warm, bored victor. And maybe one more nature one, very short. The Forest of Hands. Hands of the black oak, playing the light. Hands of the ponderosa, a brush for the wind's voice. Hands of cedar froth and alder feather, hands of cones, fat-fingered sugar and pitch-fingered, thin and brittle, broken-fingered, ham-handed sugar pine cones, 2 feet long. There is one back there. Tight-fisted cones, fists full of berries, old thistle fists, grassy hands, fists full of seeds, long blue lupin hands, testing the air. Under the earth, all hands in pieces, bones in the dark dirt. And I think I'll do one more, and that is about me. And now it's hiding from me. All right, cyclist. As a girl, once or twice I thought, how do I know I'm me, a child? What if really I'm at the other end of life, an old woman, judgment gone, who thinks she's a girl on a bike in the wind, who wings up a steep slope almost without effort and down again, singing, her strong breath taking in, pushing out the breath of the world. But really, she can't get out of her chair without a hand up. Now I'm an old woman. I know that much. Or do I? What if I'm a girl on a bike, winging through the countryside, working her strong legs, loving her subtle balance, her breathing, looking, singing, thinking for a moment. What if I'm an old woman? Would it be so bad? She sings to the fields, the same song over and over to catch the first joy, go deep inside it. She plans her life, a chanteuse surrounded by her adoring band. Her lover on bass looks over and blows her a kiss she can see just out of the corner of her eye. Her voice, a slender waterfall, curls down in white spirals. I hope I got through that. Her voice, a slender waterfall, curls down in white spirals. I think I'll call it a day at that.
That's that was my favorite one.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so Dorothy, thanks so much. I really feel like we've learned a lot about you. I want to say we do have plenty of time for questions, so I have some, but I'll go ahead and call on anybody that wants to speak.
I'm so glad we do have time. You know, I really wanted to read these things, but I would have felt very bad if we didn't have enough time for the other.
Yeah. And Gail, I'm so glad you could join us.
Yes, I was afraid you had something else to do.
I did, but I got home around 4.
Oh.
No,
So,
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, do you have a question?
No, I was just going to say that my daughter, my grandkid, and I went to the Cirque du Soleil in Vancouver. We had tickets. quite wonderful, but I at least was here for the last hour of Dorothy.
Great. And Dorothy, I wanted to I just wanted to ask, it sounds like you're still writing poetry. Do you belong to a writing group?
I have actually not, I'm not very closely connected to one, but I have friends that with whom I share. I mean, we don't meet as a group, but we do connect. And I have in the past done that. For years I did it with poetry and fiction.
Jeannie?
Tom had his hand up ahead of me.
Sorry, thanks, Jeannie. I didn't see. Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry that I didn't, I'm sorry, got interrupted earlier. So you were talking about Westtown and your experiences there. I'd like to know more about your association with Quakers since that time. Like, when you started attending Berkeley meeting, are there other meetings you attended in your life besides Berkeley?
Well, really, no, it's been a long hiatus. I've always been interested. I've always thought that one day I would do it, but I kept putting it off. And then about 3 years ago, I should look through my calendars and find out, I think I've been, it's been at least 2 years, I think more like 3, that I've been going, attending Berkeley meeting. I might say, I think one thing, I don't know if I said this, there are lots of things I intended to say that I may or may not have said. And one is that Quaker education has been extremely important in my family. And we're Quakers on my mother's side, most of us. And my brother went to George School and then to Haverford when it was still a men's college. And then he taught for years. He taught political science at Swarthmore. And also my mother's brother was a much beloved dean of men at Swarthmore. Much beloved. I think he probably saved a lot of confused, upset young men's lives. And I used to, when I worked in New York, I used to occasionally meet young people, mainly men, who had been to Swarthmore, and they would rave about him and what a wonderful man he was and how he saved their lives. But that's pretty much, there was a long blank. But I found Berkeley, I found the BFM eventually, and I've always been very, very glad since.
And we're glad you did. Jamie, go ahead.
So you were such an East Coast person. So how did you decide to come to Davis and switch coasts for your PhD?
Well, it was hard for me to get into graduate school. It had been a 12-year hiatus, and I was not in early days a very distinguished student, and I was switching fields. I'd been a history major,
Right.
and now I was trying to get into English, and so it was not easy for me to get in. And so I had friends who were at UC Davis, and I was interested in some of their friends, working with some of their friends, and so that's where I went.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then I really fell in love with California, not so much with the Sacramento Valley, which is too hot.
Donna?
Thanks, Dorothy. Thank you for this wonderful story. You've talked a lot about changelings and animals, and I just wonder if you have had any animals as part of your own life.
Well, I was hoping that my current animal would show up, but she's sitting in my window soaking up the sun. Her name is Pamina. Like Gail, I love Mozart and I love Mozart opera, and I've always thought that I would have a cat named Zerlina, after the peasant girl in Don Giovanni, Mozart's Don Giovanni, and it's always seemed to me eerie that Gail has had a Zerlina whom she has just lost, and I am very, very sorry for your loss, Gail. I know how hard it is to lose a beloved pet. But my cat, I named Pamina after the ingenue role in Mozart's The Magic Flute, because she seemed more like a Pamina to me. She's a beautiful girl. She's black, and she has very silky, beautiful. She has very silky, beautiful coat, and so she is a great joy to me. But I've had many, many pets. I grew up with a collie who was a great joy to me. And yeah, and we had all these cats always. We always had both dogs and cats. And then as an adult, I've had I don't know, in 40 years, I've had 7 or 8 cats. I didn't have dogs much as I love dogs, adore dogs, but cats were just somehow easier when I was moving around a lot and feeling very unsettled. I find the idea of the changeling or the person who is an animal some of the, humans, is a human animal some of the time, and another kind of animal the rest of the time. For whatever reason, sometimes it's a curse, sometimes it's just the way it is. And Marie de France has a wonderful werewolf story. And in that particular story, it isn't a curse. It's just that he's that kind of creature.
So I was just going to ask you about that. I saw your email. Is Marie's nice werewolf? Is that in reference to Marie de France?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes. And you see in that story, it's actually hilarious. The werewolf is a very nice fellow, and it's the human beings who are rotten. He has a wife who doesn't know what he is, but he keeps going off, disappearing, and she doesn't know why. He doesn't tell her, and she thinks he's having an affair, and she says, "Tell me, you have to tell me." And he says, "Lady, I become a werewolf," and he explains the whole thing. And she is so disgusted by the idea that she's married to this animal that she takes up with a man who's been after her and whom she hasn't been interested in up to now. And he manages to steal the werewolf's man clothes so that the husband is trapped in a werewolf hood. And then the lady and her lover get married and so forth. But they're rotten, awful rotten people. And the husband, well, he gets out of it, but I'm not going to tell you how.
Oh,
Yes.
yes. Anybody else? Gail? Yeah.
Yeah. I met Dorothy maybe 2 or 3 years ago because she was teaching an OLLI course, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, on animals, animals in translation. At any rate, on animals in animals in literature. That's what it was. And we learned about the Marie's Nice Werewolf, and we also read The Golden Ass of Apuleius and a number of other poems and literature that involves animals. And since I love animals deeply, and the course, I thought the course was wonderful. And so we stayed in touch. And in fact, I think it was me who started talking to Dorothy about Quakers and finding out that she had been.
Yes.
And I invited her to come to Berkeley meeting.
Yes, that's right. You were the connection. I'm sorry, I forgot all about that. I just had you.
That's fine. At any rate, it was a lovely course. And getting to know Dorothy was also quite lovely. And I did think it was fun that I had a cat named Zerlina, from Don Giovanni, and Dorothy had a cat named Pamina from the Magic Flute. I thought that was a lovely, lovely connection. And I'm up here in Canada. This is my granddaughter's bedroom, and I hope that I will stay in touch with Dorothy and with all of you, even though I have seemed to have moved to Bellingham. I have moved to Bellingham.
Yes. Well, good luck in Bellingham, but please do stay in touch.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have a question or a comment?
This is Margaret.
Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you. This has been a lovely presentation, and I'm just awestruck by the life you've lived.
Oh, thank you so much. I've had a lot of joy. I've had a lot of joy and happiness with literature and with teaching, but also with all my friends. And I feel fortunate.
Well, I feel fortunate to have you here today. Thank you so much. It's been delightful. Are there any other comments? You ready to call it a day?
This
You know,
was
I might
great. Thank you so much.
I might, if people are patient, throw in one other, in this course that I taught the freshmen and that I taught in the OLLI. It was a bit of a problem in the OLLI because they had to get the book and so forth, and it was a little difficult. But there's this book, The Golden Ass by Apuleius, very, very influential book. I mean, for centuries, if you were cultivated European, that's what you read. You read it. And in it, a thoroughly spoiled young nobleman is dabbling in magic, and really seems to me very much the way a young man today might dabble foolishly and dangerously with drugs and so forth. And he has a girlfriend who is not very bright, and she gets hold of a salve. She's her mistress is a witch, and she gets hold of a salve which she thinks will turn her boyfriend, or turn Apuleius temporarily into an evil, but it doesn't. It turns him into an ass, and he lives a long time throughout the novel as a donkey, and he sees very much the underside of human existence, and you do too. And if you know much about Roman literature, it's a lot of it's brutal and it's very naughty, and there's a lot of that. One thing I like about it is that the metaphor. I mean, the young man was an ass, and then he really becomes one. And well, eventually he grows up. But anyway, it's a very, very influential book, and students love it. And of course, one connection is A Midsummer Night's Dream, which I'm sure there was a connection. I just couldn't resist telling that story.
Yeah. No, I read it when I was taking that class with Dorothy, and it's a great read. It's a really great read, even though it was written, a couple thousand years ago. I recommend it.
Beautiful. Anything else? All right, I think it's a wrap. Thank you, Dorothy, and thank you, Donna, for taking care of the recording.
Thank you all so very, very much. And Donna, that was wonderful. And Barb, you've been such a support. Great job. And I'm so grateful to everybody.